Imagine this. A power-hungry HOA Karen unleashes the cops on a humble ranch cabin, demanding it's demolished in just 30 minutes flat. But she has no clue that the land she's bossing around actually belongs to the very person she's trying to bully. Buckle up for a wild ride of property revenge that'll leave you cheering. Hey everyone. If you're hooked on these insane HOA showdowns and Karen meltdowns, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the next epic tale of neighborhood tyranny getting owned. Let's dive right in. In the sprawling outskirts of a once quiet Texas town, where the sun baked the earth into a golden crust and the wind whispered secrets through the mesquite trees, lived a man named Elias Thorne. Elias was a rugged soul, the kind who'd spent his life under wide-open skies far from the cookie-cutter suburbs that had begun creeping closer like an unwelcome fog. His ranch cabin, a weathered structure of logs and stone, stood as a testament to simpler times, nestled on a vast acreage that his family had owned for generations. It wasn't much to look at, a single-story haven with a wraparound porch, a stone fireplace that crackled with stories of old, and windows that framed the endless horizon. But to Elias it was home, a sanctuary from the chaos of modern life. The trouble began innocently enough, or so it seemed. The neighboring development, Whispering Pines Estates, had sprung up like weeds after a rainstorm. It was one of those gated communities where every lawn was manicured to perfection, every mailbox identical, and every resident bound by the ironclad rules of the Homeowners Association. At the helm of this HOA was Karen Whitaker, a woman whose name alone could make grown men shudder. Karen was the epitome of suburban entitlement, sharp-featured, always clad in pastel polo shirts and khakis, with a clipboard perpetually in hand and a glare that could wilt flowers. She ruled Whispering Pines with an unyielding fist, enforcing bylaws on everything from fence heights to holiday decorations, and she took particular delight in issuing fines for the slightest infractions. Elias's property bordered the estates, separated only by a rickety wire fence that had stood for decades. His cabin was visible from the higher-end homes on the hill, a blot on their pristine landscape. Whispers started among the residents, complaints about the eyesore that lowered property values, murmurs about how it didn't fit the aesthetic of their upscale enclave. Karen, ever the vigilant enforcer, latched onto these gripes like a hawk spotting prey. She began her campaign subtly, sending polite letters to Elias requesting that he beautify his cabin to align with community standards. Elias, bemused by the audacity, ignored them. His land wasn't part of their HOA. It was his birthright, deeded to his great-grandfather in the late 1800s. Undeterred, Karen escalated. She organized neighborhood meetings where she railed against the nuisance neighbor, painting Elias as a reclusive troublemaker who harbored unkempt livestock and hosted rowdy gatherings, none of which was true. Elias kept a few horses and chickens, but his life was peaceful, spent tending to his garden and repairing old farm equipment. The residents, swayed by Karen's charisma and fear of her wrath, signed petitions demanding action. Karen, emboldened, decided to take matters into her own hands. She researched local ordinances, twisting them to her will, and convinced herself that Elias's cabin violated zoning laws, even though it predated the suburbs by a century. One sweltering afternoon, as Elias sat on his porch sipping iced tea, watching the shadows lengthen across his fields, a sheriff's deputy pulled up in a dusty cruiser. The deputy, a young man named Deputy Harlan, stepped out with a sheaf of papers, his face etched with reluctance. He explained that a complaint had been filed by the HOA, claiming the cabin was an illegal structure on disputed land. Elias chuckled at first, thinking it a joke, but the deputy's solemn expression told him otherwise. Karen had called the authorities, alleging that the cabin encroached on community property and posed a safety hazard. She demanded immediate demolition, citing some obscure emergency clause that allowed for swift action in cases of imminent danger. Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He invited the deputy inside, offering him a seat by the fire, though it was unlit in the heat. As they talked, Elias pulled out his old deed, yellowed with age, showing the boundaries of his ranch. The deputy nodded but explained he had to follow protocol. An inspection was scheduled, and if violations were found, the cabin could be red-tagged. Word spread quickly through Whispering Pines, and Karen reveled in her victory, patrolling the streets with a smug grin. assuring neighbors that the problem would soon be resolved. Days turned into a tense standoff. Elias consulted a local attorney, a grizzled veteran named Mr. Caldwell, who assured him his title was ironclad. But Karen was relentless. She rallied more support, even contacting the county commissioner, a distant relative of hers, to push for expedited enforcement. Elias began noticing strange occurrences: tire tracks near his fence, anonymous notes warning him to comply, and once a drone buzzing overhead, no doubt spying for the HOA. The pressure mounted, but Elias stood firm, repairing his cabin's roof as if to defy the threats. As the sun dipped low one evening, casting long shadows over the ranch, Elias uncovered something in his attic, an old survey map from the 1920s. It detailed not just his land but the surrounding parcels. His heart raced as he traced the lines. It appeared that a portion of Whispering Pines itself was built on land that had once been part of his family's holdings. A clerical error, perhaps, or a shady deal long forgotten. Elias decided to dig deeper, sensing that this could turn the tide. The conflict simmered, building toward an inevitable clash. Karen, unaware of the storm brewing, planned her final assault, a coordinated effort with law enforcement to force Elias out. Little did she know the ground she stood on was shakier than she imagined. As night fell, Elias pored over documents by lamplight, the first threads of revenge weaving into place. The revelation from the old map ignited a fire in Elias that burned brighter than any Texas sun. He spent sleepless nights in his cabin, surrounded by stacks of yellowed papers, land records, and historical plats borrowed from the county archives. Mr. Caldwell, his attorney, became a frequent visitor, their discussions stretching into the wee hours as they pieced together a puzzle that spanned generations. It turned out that in the 1950s, during a land boom, Elias's grandfather had sold a small tract to developers, but with stipulations that were never fully honored. More crucially, a surveying mistake had misaligned boundaries, placing several acres of what was now Whispering Pines squarely within the Thorne family estate. Elias's land wasn't just adjacent. It encompassed the very foundation of the HOA's prized common areas: the clubhouse, the swimming pool, even parts of the gated entrance. The developers had built over it decades ago, assuming clear title, but the error had lain dormant like a buried mine. Elias had always known his ranch was vast, but he'd never bothered to contest the encroachments, preferring solitude over strife. Now, with Karen's aggression forcing his hand, he saw an opportunity not just to defend his cabin, but to reclaim what was rightfully his. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down on her crusade. She organized a special HOA meeting in the opulent clubhouse where residents sipped lemonade and nodded along as she outlined her plan. The cabin, she declared, was a blight that threatened their way of life, and she'd secured a court order for its removal. Exaggerating tales of code violations and potential hazards, she whipped the crowd into a frenzy. Fines were levied against any who dissented, and spies were sent to monitor Elias's property. One neighbor, emboldened by anonymity, even slashed Elias's tires under cover of night, though Elias suspected Karen's influence. The tension escalated when the county inspector arrived, escorted by Deputy Harlan and a smirking Karen. They traipsed across Elias's land, clipboard in hand, noting every perceived flaw: the uneven porch steps, the aged wiring, the proximity to a dry creek bed that could flood in theory. Elias watched from afar, his jaw set, as they slapped a condemnation notice on his door. 30 minutes to vacate, the inspector barked, though it was more bluster than law. Karen stood triumphant, her arms crossed, envisioning the bulldozers rolling in. Elias didn't panic. Instead, he filed a quiet counterclaim with the county, attaching the historical documents. Mr. Caldwell worked tirelessly, gathering affidavits from elderly locals who remembered the old boundaries. As word leaked, whispers rippled through Whispering Pines. Some residents grew uneasy, questioning Karen's overreach, but she quashed dissent with threats of special assessments. One fateful morning, as dew clung to the grass, Elias received a call from Mr. Caldwell. The judge had reviewed the evidence and issued a temporary injunction halting any action against the cabin. Elated, Elias drove into town, stopping at the HOA's annual picnic uninvited. He observed from the shadows as Karen held court, boasting of her impending victory. That evening he began Phase 2, notifying the HOA board of the boundary dispute. Letters were sent, certified and ominous, detailing the encroachment and demanding restitution. Karen's reaction was volcanic. She stormed to the county office demanding the claims be dismissed as fraudulent. But the records didn't lie. Panic set in as residents learned their dream homes might sit on borrowed land. Karen called emergency meetings, hiring her own lawyer, a slick city type who promised to bury Elias in paperwork. The battle lines hardened, with Elias's cabin standing as a symbol of resistance. As autumn leaves began to fall, coloring the landscape in hues of red and gold, Elias uncovered more. Tax records showing his family had paid on the disputed acres for years while the HOA had not. The noose tightened around Karen's neck, though she fought like a cornered animal. The community fractured, with some siding with Elias, tired of Karen's tyranny. Others, loyal or fearful, rallied behind her. The climax loomed as a hearing was set. Elias prepared meticulously, his cabin now a war room of maps and files. Karen, sensing defeat, resorted to dirtier tactics, spreading rumors about Elias's past, even attempting to bribe a witness. But integrity held firm. As the hearing approached, the air crackled with anticipation, the fate of Whispering Pines hanging by a thread. The courtroom in the old county seat buzzed with an electric tension, the wooden benches filled with Whispering Pines residents, local reporters, and curious onlookers drawn by the scandal's viral spread on social media. Elias sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, his weathered hands folded over the stack of irrefutable documents. Mr. Caldwell, sharp in his suit, exuded confidence. Across the aisle, Karen fidgeted, her face a mask of forced composure, flanked by her high-priced attorney who shuffled papers nervously. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and a gavel that commanded silence, called the proceedings to order. Testimony unfolded methodically. Elias's side presented the historical deeds, surveys, and tax records, painting a clear picture of the boundary error. Experts testified to the authenticity, tracing the mistake back to a 1960s clerical oversight when the development was rushed. The encroached land included not just fringes but core amenities, the pool where children splashed on summer days, the clubhouse hosting bridge games and barbecues, even the playground swings creaking in the breeze. Karen's lawyer countered with arguments of adverse possession, claiming the HOA had occupied the land long enough to own it. But holes riddled their case. No formal claim had been filed, and Elias's ongoing taxes undermined their stance. Witnesses for Karen stumbled, their stories inconsistent under cross-examination. One resident admitted to doubts about the HOA's overreach, earning Karen's icy glare. As the day wore on, the truth emerged unassailable. The judge ruled in Elias's favor, declaring the disputed acres part of the Thorne estate. Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's face drained of color, her empire crumbling. The HOA was ordered to vacate the encroached areas or negotiate a lease, at Elias's discretion. Fines were levied against Karen personally for frivolous complaints and harassment. In the aftermath, Whispering Pines descended into chaos. Residents turned on Karen, demanding her resignation. Board meetings devolved into shouting matches, with petitions circulating to dissolve the HOA entirely. Karen, humiliated, sold her home at a loss and slunk away to parts unknown, her reputation in tatters. Elias, magnanimous in victory, offered a fair lease to the community, allowing them to keep their amenities for a nominal fee, on condition of reformed bylaws that curbed excessive rules. The cabin stood untouched, a beacon of resilience. Elias returned to his peaceful life, but with newfound respect from neighbors who now waved in passing. The story spread far and wide, inspiring others to challenge tyrannical HOAs. As winter's chill settled over the ranch, Elias sat by his fire, content that justice had prevailed. The land's secrets finally laid bare. Whew, what a roller coaster of HOA revenge. If you enjoyed this tale of sweet justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more epic stories. Drop your own HOA horror in the comments below. See you in the next one.